Hello? Okay. All right. We're going to start the next section of our program. You can all take a seat.
Sorry.
All right. And this last half of the day, we will have two town halls. And the first town hall is entitled "The Crisis of Capitalism is the Crisis of Young People." And on the panel, we have Dr. Montero, Grady Light, Jacob, Brandon Bell, and Jeremiah Harris. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I will be the moderator for the town hall, which is, as Serafina just mentioned, the crisis of young people is the crisis of capitalism. And that town hall will be followed later by a second one, moderated by Meghna. That will be titled, "Will Young People Fight for Socialism?" And I just wanted to begin by quoting an essay by James Baldwin entitled "Black Power," where he talks about Stokely Carmichael, who's also been brought up several times throughout the symposium. But Baldwin talks about Stokely Carmichael and particularly what was at the time a prevailing mood among Black youth, that they would not have their lives be determined by a system that degraded them and waged wars against the darker peoples of the world. And although Baldwin disagreed with Stokely on certain principles, both ideologically and strategically, Baldwin nonetheless took Stokely's case, in which he was attacked by the government for opposing the Vietnam War, and he used it as a way to raise the fact that the existing capitalist system in the West was opposed to the self-realization of the potential of young Black people. And Baldwin writes, quote, "All Black Americans are born into a society which is determined, repeat, determined, that they shall never learn the truth about themselves or their society, and which is determined that Black men shall use as their only frame of reference what white Americans convey to them of their own potentialities, and of the shape, size, dimensions, and possibilities of the world. And I do not hesitate for an instant to condemn this as a crime. To persuade Black boys and girls, as we have for so many generations, that their lives are worth less than other lives, and that they can live only on terms dictated to them by other people, by people who despise them, is worse than a crime. It is a sin against the Holy Ghost. Now, I may not always agree with Stokely's views or the ways in which he expresses them. My agreement or disagreement is absolutely irrelevant. I get his message. Stokely Carmichael, a Black man under 30, is saying to me, a Black man over 40, that he will not live the life I've lived, or be corralled into some of the awful choices I've been forced to make. And he is perfectly right. The government and the people who have made his life and mine, and the lives of all our forefathers, and the lives of all our brothers and sisters, and women and children, an indescribable hell, has no right now to penalize the Black man, this so despised stranger here for so long, for attempting to discover if the world is as small as the Americans have told him it is. And the political implications involve nothing more and nothing less than what the Western world takes to be its material self-interest, end quote. And I think Baldwin here is making a very important point, which is just to restate it, that the interests of the ruling elite in the West are opposed not just to the interests, but to the consciousness and the aspirations of young people, particularly young Black people. And so for this town hall, we're going to talk about the crisis of young people. And also, as you can see, this panel is comprised all of men. So in particular, we're going to talk about young Black men and young men of color. And we can find some general statistics related to the topic of this town hall. For instance, Nearly a quarter of Philadelphia lives in poverty today, and 2/5 of children in the city live below the poverty line. The official unemployment rate is around 12%, but this doesn't account for the rising number of people, particularly Black men, who have dropped out of the labor force altogether after decades of deindustrialization and ruthless financialization. More than 60% of the city's poor who are of working age have no job and are not looking for one. Only about half of the city's population is functionally literate. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for Black men between ages of 15 to 34. And put together, all of these numbers are very sobering. But Henry Winston would say, as he did when he was organizing the Young Communist League and in a speech that he gave to the Young Communist League in 1940, that we have to go beyond the statistics and ask questions like, what do we know about these young people as human beings? What does the society tell them? What choices do they feel that they have? These are the questions which we will try to address in this town hall today. And with our four speakers, we really want to try to understand the life world of the younger generation and what it reflects about the state of the system in which we live. And just briefly to go over the format for this discussion, we're going to begin with some opening remarks from each speaker for a few minutes, followed by a few questions from myself and then questions from the audience. And we're going to have an open discussion with the audience and the speakers. And just to reintroduce our speakers today, I'd like to mention that we were supposed to have Gregory Mohammed, who is a member of the Nation of Islam, and the coordinator for the Nation of Islam's Prison Reform Ministry, supposed to be on this discussion, this panel, but he unfortunately could not make it. But we are joined by Dr. Anthony Montero, who, as you know, is the founder of the Saturday Free School, a former member of the Communist Party, who was mentored by Henry Winston. And we also have Grady Lights, who is retired from SEPTA's planning division, if I heard that correctly? Administration, and who is deeply involved in art advocacy and social justice. We also have Brandon Doe, who is a member of the Saturday Free School. And we also have Jacob Harris, who is a member of the Saturday Free School and also a member of the W.B. Du Bois and James Baldwin Reading Collective and an actor. And I'd like to begin by opening it up to Dr. Montero, or actually no, Brandon Doe, if you want to start. Yeah.
First, I would like to thank the organizers in the Saturday Free School for putting this event together about us important and significant figures such as Henry Winston. I believe Henry Winston is very relevant to the crisis of young people because we live in a society that is increasingly divided. And in the way that James Baldwin said, people are afraid to speak. And I think that's what I want to do in my presentation, is to get under the foundations of this society, but also to talk about how history and experience completes one another. And then in the discussion, hopefully we can talk about the ideas that lead to a higher form of human agency. Although I am by no means a sociologist, being a natural observer and studier of people, I believe that our experiences give us the clarity to understand how history lives within people and how history informs our decisions and our thoughts today. I've been fortunate enough to meet strangers from many different walks of life. I received my education from family, friends, and strangers, all of whom fit into the different categories of society. I understand tragedies occur on both sides of society, affecting both the haves and the have-nots. However, what they all have in common is that they are afflicted by the same crisis of values that is connected to the system that controls and governs this country. The aim of my presentation is not to go into detail about how different people are oppressed and the differences of their oppression, but rather to present how I've seen the ruling class imprison the American people in fear and pessimism, and broadening the conversation to discuss ideas that lead to higher forms of human agency and how to present them to the youth. It wasn't until I read about world history that I began to see the significance of my birthday and began to put my experiences into a clearer perspective. I was born only 3 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the central organizer of world peace. The world peace movement bridged the people of America to the rest of the world. It was furthermore what connected the American people across racial and cultural boundaries to one another. Some of the questions presented to me were, if our country spends billions on war, then what will be left to give towards our children who suffer under a decaying educational system? Why is it a priority to use this money for the enslavement of other people rather than to pay our workers a fair wage that they can use to provide for their families? Peace was and is an issue that affects the American people, is what I began to understand. I learned that if you were a Black worker who wanted to unite with white workers in the fight for better wages, you could be called a communist. Or that if you believed as a Black man that Vietnamese people who were fighting for their own freedom from the same oppressors are your brothers, then your livelihood could be taken away from you. There are indisputable parts of American history where sympathizers to non-Western countries and peace organizers were labeled as agents of a foreign government, thrown in jail, and even put in the electric chair. It is important to note that it wasn't just people who called themselves communists who were attacked by this agenda, but simply those who had the heart and the courage to stand on truth. Once I learned all of this, I realized that today is not so different. The notion that has been proven to be true throughout the movements in world history, that the liberation of you is separable to the liberation of the world, has been removed from our educational system and all forms of public discourse. The upholders of that notion, such as James Baldwin, W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, have all been demonized or deliberately misinterpreted to confuse our generation and remove them as models to look up to and learn from. Any attempt to revive the spirit of unity is attacked. Today, it is harder than I can ever remember to have an honest conversation without someone accusing you of being transphobic, homophobic, fatphobic, xenophobic, and racist. I can see how this leads to the criminalization of young men and stagnates their growth toward manhood, making them afraid, beating them into a point of submission and cowardice. I can see how men are taught in rap music that it's cool to kill your own brother or to aid the destruction of your own people by selling drugs. Both the drug dealer and the drug addict see no viable way forward besides the destruction of oneself or the destruction of others as a means of uplifting oneself. This is reflected in the philosophy of the US war machine as well, which aims to build our nation off of the destruction of other nations. I can see how women of color have been conditioned to celebrate their own degradation by turning against their men and giving themselves up to the white man. I often ask myself, what kinds of sons will these women be raising? What happens when children look up to celebrities instead of their parents? Because they are taught that you're not worth anything if you don't have the things that celebrities have. I know from being a witness to it that one of the worst things that can happen to a young father is to have a broken relationship with his daughter. This is one of the ways that the ruling class breaks apart the family structure. Everything produced in this time, the music, film, literature, are geared towards removing our agency and removing our collective struggle for freedom as a choice. People really believe that they are lonely, that no one will understand them, that the world is against them or that they are unlovable. The vulnerability and openness it takes to build unity with another person has been removed as a part of the still rampant anti-communist war agenda. Once I learned of this history of anti-communism, I can see the great consequence of this bridge to humanity and this sense of common purpose being removed from everyday people. I was able to see America in a much clearer way when I visited Vietnam. There are many poor people in Vietnam, as there are in America. The difference is that in Vietnam, there is poverty as in lack of money. But in America, there is a double poverty. The poverty when it comes to the lack of money, but furthermore, the poverty of spirit. The lack of hope and a strong culture that gets you from one day to the next helps you see that a new tomorrow is possible. Here we lack a foundation that gives you the strength to fight for a better tomorrow. We as a generation are losing many people as the years go by. You see friends and family die by suicide, drug addiction, and violence. You see people thrown in jail. You see people who choose to wander life without direction. You see the once bright and beautiful faces of people you knew since you were in diapers turn dark from the experience of perpetual tragedies and losses. People who are so beaten down that they can no longer live a life with joy. You see the brightness that leaves a person's eyes once they turn to drugs. While this could easily be misinterpreted as a feeling of nostalgia over my past, I do believe that society has descended into a moment of extreme pessimism. I refuse to believe that what my generation is going through can simply be accepted as a normal part of life, but rather it is a reaction to a society that is increasingly decadent, hopeless, and uneducated because the ruling class of this country aims to expand its rule over Asia. Through my education, I was able to see that for the purveyors of war to be successful, they had to inflict on our country a worldview that stoked the flames of division and fear. I can see how my generation as a whole, directly, indirectly, mentally, physically, and spiritually has been affected by this. I often think about the ideas that could save the lives of so many young people in our generation who are living without a future. Those who feel ashamed of themselves because they feel like there's nothing they can do to change their lives for the better. Those who haven't fully understood how precious life is and how meaningful their time on earth can be. So they live recklessly because they don't believe that they even have a future. Most people do not believe that they can determine their own destiny. They are taught to believe that, but history proves otherwise. How did the civil rights movement instill in young people the courage to take part in the freedom rides through the white supremacist areas of the South and become new human beings in the process? How did Muhammad Ali find the courage to sacrifice his livelihood to refuse to take part in the American war in Vietnam? How did the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad raise the living dead, the drug addicts, the criminals, the prostitutes, out of their slumber and transform them into upright men and women who saw their common destiny in the oppressed peoples of the world? What changes would take place in the hearts of young men of color if they were told that we are Asiatic Black men, or that we are a part of a world house where people of all races and religions are to live in peace and harmony, and that it is their responsibility to make this a reality? What will happen when they are told that they belong not to one race or religion, but that they are citizens of the world, and that they have brothers and sisters all over the world waiting for them to take their hand in the struggle? Perhaps some of the people who we lost would be alive today if they were presented with these ideas. This should motivate us to continue to fight for the future and to fight for the generations to come, for people to take pride in their manhood, for them to become agents of positive change and to create a world where peace is seen as the only future for mankind. My generation needs new ideas that build off these ideas of the Black freedom movement and the anti-colonial movements. They need them to rise above victimhood, to refuse to remain products of their environment, and to become changers of their environment and the world. And I'm excited to discuss them with you all today.
First of all, thank you all so much for coming out, and I've really appreciated the conference thus far. Before I get into my presentation, I'd actually like to say two things. One being that, you know, the questions that Brandon was asking just now are not rhetorical. They're not, he's not trying to convince you of something. Those are serious questions that need to be reflected, that I feel, that I wish to reflect on, you know, and I feel that need to be reflected on in order to understand how could a Muhammad Ali stand up? How? You know? The second thing, I wish I had my Baldwin book on me, but James Baldwin, on describing Malcolm X, described him as, you know, he was a genuine saint. He described him as being able, he was important for the morale of the people, because he described to the people he couldn't, you know, take the money out of the hands of the money changers, you know, that is the monopolists, but he could describe to the people, you know, how the hands of the money was changing hands. And on this basis was good, and described to the people their conditions, you know, and showed them how they themselves could overcome those conditions. And, you know, I feel the reason why I bring that up is because I feel that is applicable deeply to Henry Winston. Henry Winston, Henry Winston and Baldwin come together a lot, because they say in unison, different ways, but in unison, that, you know, being a Black person, well, I'll say parenthetically, being a Black person in America is being told that, you know, what's happening to you is your fault. This idea is a disease that has that has reached the hearts of every person in America. You know, it's this essential, I think, ideological contradiction. And Baldwin and Henry Winston and our Black freedom fighters and our historical revolutionary movements are teaching us that, you know, no, it's not your fault, it's a matter of conditions. And don't forget who put those conditions on you, and don't forget your enemy. So with that, I'd like to begin my presentation that I entitled, I put his name in, but it's on my brother and the crisis of capitalism. I knew a man who I rode with, who I was raised with, who I played video games with, and even sang songs with. He played drums and always wanted to form a band. To this idea, I was highly gung-ho, but alas, our young feet dragged and it never happened. His father is a musician, and music is in his blood. When we drove back from crew practice, which he and I and Serafina and our friends shared, he would always lay down a bass line a cappella beat, and Serafina would carry the high melody, and I would you know, sing what notes came to my mind. In that way, the way of spontaneity and openness, we were free young people. The freedom was purchased through a certain security of our working parents. We weren't hungry, we were allowed leisure, we had a physical security. So when we'd walk around Germantown, we'd walk loud and brash and joking and serious, like the groups of young people walking around that you see around Philly after school, young people carrying on, playing with each other, not quite knowing the gift of youth they have, but using it. He and I used to stay out until 4 or 5 in the morning. At that point, I stopped going to school, and he'd long since dropped out of college, that is. We both stared down the barrel of student loans. He worked hard, was going to be an engineer, but there was nothing the school district of Philadelphia could give him Not that the civilization hadn't produced engineers before, but apparently we couldn't afford to in Philadelphia. We could in the suburbs, to those children's spiritual death. He was a kind boy, a strong man, generous and immovable, stubborn in his loyalty to his friends and always willing to laugh. I can't remember when he told me he was joining the Navy. I remember I cried at a party. We were both had together. He was right in front of me. I was drunk and bent over, my tears fell, falling on the pavement. I texted Serafina and Brandon that I loved them. And I cried because I was losing my friend, because he couldn't pay his student loans, because there was no job that he could get, that would give him a stability to play music and to be with his friends and to do as young men do. No job that could help him buy his own place, to be on his feet, to be upright and a man. He was a janitor in the military. I remember he related a story where the military made all the cadets get naked and wave their junk around in the ocean, our proud and honorable military. He told us that he knew women that blank. My memory goes blank, but it broke him down into tears. It activated my rage, the terror known as hatred. This terrifying civilization, whose primary will is found in the military, destroying everyone involved in it. He was a janitor in a place where if they leave a certain valve open, a gas comes in and kills everyone, could kill him. I'm not supposed to be reminded of Dachau or Vietnam. At his working conditions, I'm not supposed to be reminded of the African diamond mines or the Amazon warehouse. This rips me apart. I love my friend as I would a brother. He is my brother. But this civilization insists on trying to convince me that it's his fault. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, sons of wealth and stability, are hardworking men, and I am assured and reassured, and my friend must not be. It's no one's fault but your own that you fail in this land of opportunity, and it's my brother's fault that he couldn't make it. All he had to do was work hard in college, in these college programs, where he would be design faster jets for the military to bomb Syria or Afghanistan or defend Taiwan from China, which is nothing less than saving Asians from Asians, or as it was called back in the days, saving the good obedient niggers from the bad ones. In a program he was underprepared for, with no purpose in it besides making money, because there is no real purpose in making bombs to kill people in other countries. Those who, I'll say parenthetically, those who have recognized their own suffering can recognize the suffering of others, and furthermore can recognize that his suffering can be my own. Thus seeing in the recesses of one's own mind that those wrongs can rip us apart, and have, if we're all truly a human family, or all sons of God, or neighbors, I'll do that. And they have, if we're all sons of God. And there is no real purpose in making money if we're also miserable, if we're also exploited. But suicide, the death of the heart, is so very shocking to us. My civilization mocks my brother. My civilization has found no ways of patronage. Has found a bunch of different ways of patronizing him. LGBT problems are supposed to be more important than the ones my brother, our neighbors, we all face in the land of equality. Black lives are supposed to matter, even though no one of the college students that make up Black Lives Matter, know my brother or his struggles. All white people are supposed to be, all white people are supposed to be racist, and my brother went to a primarily white college, had a white best friend, and a couple of halfsies. America is supposed to be a progressive country, but my brother has to give his 6 years of his life to pay back student loans, sounding quite like indentured servitude. America is supposed to no longer be a racist country, even though he, a young Black man living in Germantown, had not the opportunity to an equal and up-to-date standard of education, whereas in the suburbs they have it, and amongst the super rich there is a grooming of leadership through capital's resources spent on their own children's finest education. China and Cuba and North Korea are supposed to be authoritarian and genocidal countries, but if my brother had been born there, he would have felt free like Robeson and owned a home by now. I see a picture of my brother now. Recently he posted one. His eyes are a little harder to read fully. They're more black and perhaps that is lighting. I would believe it is, because the man I see in the picture is still my brother, has held on to his humanity, and has held it because he is strong and comes from a good family. The family, nor he can be blamed for the conditions he faced, conditions he was placed under, conditions that were placed on him once in the name of the innocent white lady, now in the name of a poor trans queer black woman. As Du Bois said, whoever has set this civilization has hell to pay. I love my brother and wish for our freedom. The overthrow of monopoly would lead to the start of democracy in this country, and getting there is the great question of our time. But I know my brother and I are traveling in that direction, and we sang together. When we get there together, we will sing songs of our people, but in the long meantime, Nina Simone sings the aspirations of our people. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains over me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, preschool. I can't tell you what a warm blanket I'm feeling right now, sharing with you, the chill in the room notwithstanding. I love you all. Jeremiah asked me toward the end of our repast if I would share some experiences from my life with you. So I don't have any prepared remarks on the theme of this panel. What I will share with you are stories from my life that are at that point of coming of age. And as I share these stories with you, I would like you to think with me as I thought, as I was reviewing my life, in the short time since we were eating together, what Henry Winston was doing at the age that I will share with you with these events. I will share an event when I was 14. I will share an event when I was in college, when I would have been about 20. And then maybe another event, which I'll figure out by the time I finish the second one. Let me just give you a little bit of background about where I come from. I am a Geechee. Geechees are African Americans who live in the southeast part of South Carolina. That geography has several intercoastal islands. The African Americans who were slaves on the plantations came from West Africa. The dialect that we speak of English is called Bagala. It is a patois, a mixture of the various African dialects from the West African countries and the simple English of commands and instructions which the plantation owners gave us when we were learning English. Geechees are notorious for their insularity. Because of the geographical location of the islands, they're enough of a distance from the mainland that you have to take a boat before there were bridges in order to get there. Because of this isolation, the cultural retainers from West Africa are more well preserved within the culture of the Geechees, and that pretty much is enshrined in the language. Amongst Northern African Americans, Geechees are known as Hicks, We're very, very attached to the old ways, and we're actually laughed at. Sort of like hillbillies are the white folk. I come from a military family. My father was a Marine on Paris Island, a lifer. I have 6 siblings. I'm the 3rd child. I have 4 brothers. Marines are notorious for obvious reasons. It's said that there are 3 types of people on the planet: men, women, males, females, and male Marines. Of my siblings, I happen to have been the darkest at a time before black was beautiful. That's an interesting comment about Jim Crow and the culture in which I came of age. And I also had the misfortune of being effeminate with a Marine father. So I had the challenge of at an early age looking at myself and trying to figure out, what does it mean not to act like being a girl? If you're 4 or 5, you can step outside yourself and imagine what that is. Coming of age involves a critical point when you discover what's wrong with you and when you don't fit into the world. And every young person has to deal with that moment at various points in their life, but it's a singular incident the first time you become aware of it. So I just wanted to give you that as a context for some of the challenges that I face. I'm going to start with the summer of 1965. I'm 14 years old. It's 2 weeks before the deadline for signing up to go to the white school. I grew up in Beaufort, South Carolina. The Beaufort High School was going to be fully integrated more than before. About 50 persons of color were part of that freshman class that entered with me. But I'm not there yet. It's 2 weeks before the deadline, and Grady did not want to go. I told my parents no. I had never defied my parents. I was so good and obedient. If you weren't, you'd be eating teeth. And my dad told Mom, she told me this when I was about 30-something, Grady was too good to be true. I just wanted him to break a curfew, talk back, do something. There's something wrong with him. So when I told them I wasn't going, they were apoplectic. They did not want to force me. I was not old enough to decide on my own, but because of my good reputation, they sent me next door to Daisy Drake. In the hamlet that I grew up in, your neighbors were your second parents. So they sent me to Daisy Drake, another Marine family. And that hot summer day in early August, she sat me down at the table, and in 15 minutes, she gave me a Black history lesson that I will never forget. She told the story of my people from the Atlantic Passage to slavery, to the Emancipation, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, up to that 2-week deadline. And this is what Daisy Drake told me. She said, Grady, don't wait to want to go. That does not matter. If you do not go to the white school, all of the suffering, pain, bloodshed, death that I've described to you would be for nothing. I started crying, and I said, I'm going. And the line that I crossed then, I've been crossing it ever since. Not just about me, but we. And when you mentioned that was a byword, a catchphrase for Henry Winston, I got that. I got that. When the school was integrated, half of the upper class in my town built a private academy, Christian academy, which did not require integration. The other half of the upper class integrated with the blacks. And that really signaled a significant dynamic in the town and within the school. I'm going to give you two more stories and then I'll yield the floor to Tony. After the first 2 years of integration, things sort of settled down, friendships were formed, and two of my friends, Connie Fouts and Louis Covington. Now, they would give me a ride after school, and the rule was that, well, you can participate in extracurricular activities and so on and so forth. This is on both sides of the color line, but you can't go home with each other. So when they drove me home, they parked the car outside the fence. And we would just hang out and talk. And then they would go home and I'd go to my home. So Louis was this towering 6'1" skinny guy. He was a deadpan humorist, just very dry. And he looked at Connie and I as just before they left, and he said, "Grady, Connie, I'm tired of this shit. You know what? One day, Grady, I'm gonna take you by the hand and I'm gonna walk right into my house with you. And I want you to do the same thing with me and Connie." And I said, "Well, I'll go into your house. I'm not bringing you into mine because I don't want to eat tea. I don't want to cross my dad." At that moment, we laughed so hard, and then it got eerily quiet. And we looked at each other, and it's hard to describe what we became aware of, but I'll do the best that I can. We became one. Every teenager wants to piss their parents off. That was the one thing that united us, and we realized that. I think that was it. I will never, ever forget it. What happened during integration, when segregation, take that away, and when you are with each altar, I don't use other anymore. That sounds too alienating and estranging. I always use altar. When you're just there with each altar, humanity shows up. I'm going to give you one more incident, then I'm going to sit down. It's the spring semester of my junior year at Haverford College. The students of color had staged a cultural diversity boycott. We stopped the college, we did a critique of the culture and the curriculum of the college, and we were able to get a commitment to institutionalizing cultural diversity at the college. Haverford College, by the way, is an excellent Ivy League school, but not part of the insider Yale Harvard cohort kind of thing. So we made that landmark. And the story I'm telling you is before things really culminated. I was working in the dining center as a student manager, and in that capacity, I had to recruit a lot of students to make up when we were short of employees. So it was a relatively small college. There were 700 students. So I knew the larger share of people because I had to know them to get them to work for me. So it was after meals. We were wrapping up the service, and some of my friends from the South, men of color, came to visit me, and I was talking with them. They had heard about the boycott, they were in the area, so they came to visit me, and some of my buddies who I used to hang out with in the dormitory saw me talking with them. And I saw them sort of look at us, and they looked at me, and we were tight. I hung out with them. We were friends. And when I left my friends, I said, well, thank you for visiting after study now. And as I was exiting the dining center, they stopped me and they looked at me for a long time. And the person was not just about me talking with my friends. They were looking at my involvement in the protests on campus. And I'll never forget this. They said, Grady, you don't love us anymore? Now, you might say, well, you can have any number of feelings about that. But what I'm going to close on is this note. Once we got to know each other and were unguarded with each, I said other, each altar, you break through to humanity. I couldn't take that back, what I shared with them. So when I was asked, you don't love us anymore, I had to feel that. So what I'm saying is that everyone comes of age. When you reach a point in your journey, when you make that recognition, aside from ideology, aside from affiliations, and all of that, when you can admit deep inside yourself your shared humanity, that's when you come of age.
Well, thank you all very much. And I'm only here because Gregory Mohammed is not here. And I was looking forward to listening to Gregory Mohammed because I read a post on Facebook of his where he talked about his life. And you know, Gregory Mohammed did a serious long bit in the penitentiary, something like 30 years. And, you know, it's not that he is from the poorest family. His brother is a bishop in some denomination. But Gregory said he made wrong choices. He wanted the life of a gangster, which is very much romanticized in American culture and in all capitalist cultures, because the life of a gangster is the life of the ruling class. So to be a gangster is to aspire not just for upward mobility, but to be like the ruling class. And so he ends up in prison without many skills, without a social and ideological anchorage, until he meets brothers in prison from the Nation of Islam. And I've been asked by Cordoba, how would I describe the Nation of Islam? And it's very difficult, except to say that it is one of those institutions that emerges in the framework of an oppressed people's struggle for dignity and uplift, where they say the outer world will offer us nothing, and if we are to make ourselves over, we must do it ourselves. And therefore the slogan, do for self. And Gregory went through all of that, and he finally gets out, and his life is in the Nation of Islam, but giving back to brothers who are locked up. And I wanted to hear can talk, and I'll tell you why. I took Purba and Shubarta. Shubarta is not here because he's back in India. They just moved from Illinois, and they're both PhDs in physics from the University of Illinois. So, as we would say in Philadelphia, they don't know nothing. And they didn't. So I said that I was going to take them up to Kensington because I wanted them to see Philadelphia far away from the university, from the protected environment that they knew as Philadelphia. And of course, everybody that comes to Philadelphia from somewhere else, especially if they're associated or connected to a university, they always tell you how much they love Philadelphia. Oh, it's so nice out here in West Philadelphia, at 44th and Pine. And it is nice, but that's not the whole story. And it's not the story I felt that they needed, nor that the free school needs. The story that we need, the narrative and the pictures and the representations that we need are somewhere else. So we got together after hanging out at a farmer's market in Chestnut Hill. So we're still in the protected zone. And we're enjoying ourselves, and I'm getting to know them. I knew Purba, I didn't know Shabbat as well. And so we're getting to know each other. So I said to myself, now it's time to go somewhere else. So I took them to Kensington, to the open-air drug market, the most lucrative open-air drug market in the United States. And according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, it makes $1 billion a year. $1 billion a year made off of the abject suffering and pain and death of thousands of people. And we drove there, we drove around Kensington Avenue, and they became eerily silent. I was cursing the whole time. You know, how could a ruling class allow this to exist? This is a terrible and ruthless ruling class. And of course it is a judgment upon the people that run this country and run this city that exists. And they began to speak. And they said that they're from India. And India is a poor country and there's poverty everywhere. They see it all the time, but they've never seen anything like that. I don't know whether it's true or not, but you know, whenever I see Purba these days, I look at her and I look in her face because I have the sense that that experience transformed her. Somehow I feel that her feet were planted more securely in the earth, on the ground that is this city. And that is this country, because Kensington is not an aberration. Kensington is America. But as we drove around, and Purba asked me about the Nation of Islam, and that's really I wanted Gregory Mohammed to be here, because I think he could better tell her politically, ideologically, and religiously what the Nation of Islam is. It is a unique type of organization. These are organizations that are unique to the Black struggle in this country. The Nation of Islam says it is fighting for freedom, justice, and equality for Black people. And even though it exists under the veil or the cloak of religion, I don't know of any other church that so boldly proclaims that they're fighting for freedom, justice, and equality for Asiatic Black men and women, which is another twist, shocking to all of us, because we're still figuring out how are we. I thought we were African Black men and women in America, but the Nation of Islam proclaims that we are Asiatic Black men and women in the hellholes of North America. Now, if that is not a paradigm, if not for upward mobility in the system, at least to give an anchorage to who you might be as an alternative to who your slave owners and oppressors say you are. It's very interesting. But I say all that because, by the way, and I had said to Catherine, we're talking on the phone, and I said, Catherine, you know, I was just up on Kensington Avenue with Purba and Shabarta, and I said, you and I have to go up there. And she said, no, I prefer to understand it intellectually. It is too emotionally troubling for me to see it in person. But then, as we saw those young people, and they were all young people, and predominantly white young people. And this is what is quite interesting, suggesting a transformation in the geography of the crisis of capitalism, which is the crisis of the people as well. That back in the days when the Nation of Islam and its soldiers, as they were called, were selling newspapers on the corners of the most dangerous, drug-infested, impoverished neighborhoods, suited down with bow ties on and bean pies, along with Muhammad Speaks, unarmed, but everybody knew not to mess with them. They were able to speak to the most downtrodden and the most oppressed. And in a lot of ways, they taught all of us a language to speak to people who were raising themselves out of heroin and crack addiction or alcoholism. They knew how to talk to and where to take a Black man or woman who were in the depths of despair. No one else had ever or has ever done that. Nobody else. The first anti-heroin movement that is getting people off of dope, and I'm serious, it's a serious matter, was the Nation of Islam. They called it cleaning yourself up, because you're not what the white oppressor says you are, and the only reason that you're strung out on dope is because you're afraid to face the fact that you've been lied to, as Malcolm said, you've been taken, you've been had, you've been bamboozled. But I say all that to say, as we drove around and I looked at young men, and in a lot of ways, I felt quite helpless. And I said to them, I said, I don't have the language to speak to these young men. And I don't. And there's not a Nation of Islam that could go into a community where there was gang violence and all that that represents and diffuse the situation, where they would go with an army or cadre of the Fruit of Islam, again dressed in suits with bow ties, and disarm people with guns, without guns, and so on and so forth. You know, back in the days, we political activists operated in those safe zones established by the Nation of Islam. They were the front rank fighters in the struggle to rectify and uplift the most wretched and the most degraded. So I just wanted this to be a part of this, I wanted to listen to this panel. And because I'm still seeking for the language, the narrative to speak to the most oppressed. And contrary to feminist theorizing, which by the way is useless in the context of an oppressed people, be they Palestinians or African Americans, and really of the poor, because quite as it's kept, in the Black community, the most degraded, the most impoverished, the most disappeared, the most homeless group are African American men, especially African American young men. They have been silenced. They have been canceled even before cancel culture came out. They were told that they had nothing to say and they needed to shut up. In some ways, it explains gangster rap. I'm not upholding gangster rap, but it became a way for young men to speak, and I'll put quotes here, their truths. Probably that is its great value. Somehow it's turned in on them. It did not point to a way out. So I just want to end on this. There's a huge task before us, the revolutionary and progressive forces. And one of the things is to ask the question, is there a Henry Winston on that corner selling dope? Is there a Henry Winston somewhere out there that all we have to do is to get the language to communicate with that person? Remember, Henry Winston said it was being in those parks in Kansas City, Missouri, and those unemployed camps where he heard ideas that he had never heard before. And he said that there is no such thing as human nature disconnected from social relationships. So indeed, those young men, and I don't use the concept that they're a lumpen proletariat or an underclass who cannot ever become agents of revolutionary change. They are, at the end of the day, the victims of an unjust and criminal system, which has condemned them to short, brutal, violent lives that most times ends up in the cemetery or in jail. Over 60% of them do not graduate from high school. A big percentage of those that do are not able to read or write too well, if at all, and they can't do math or count. They're disabled as participants in this economy. So just who are they? What is their potential? Can they be agents, or some of them be agents of revolutionary change? Can those who rise above their circumstances be the ones who go back and educate the others? I'll end there. Thank you.
Okay. Does this work? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Montero, and all the speakers for giving your opening remarks. I want to start with a question about role models and how important they are. I think Brandon mentioned this in his opening remarks, but how important models are for young people to develop a sense of self, a sense of responsibility, a sense of morality. And I wanted to ask, what do you think in terms of what kinds of role models are most needed for young people to learn their responsibility, but also in terms of how even you understand yourself. And do the youth of today have these role models, and if not, who is pushed onto them as a model to emulate and why?
When it comes to role models, that made me think of like a lot of things. Certainly my experience at the free school with Dr. Montero, with Brandon. But I also, it also made me think of some of my coworkers, older Black men who have done hard time. And I'd say furthermore that there are other people, and the importance of the role model, I'll kind of get there, but the role model that I kind of came to in my head just in that short period of time was Munchie. And Munchie, I mean, first of all, the importance of a Munchie can't be understated. Munchie always, when he talked, he started like by saying where he was coming from. When I was, and the way he talked was, he had this brightness in his voice, and he had this brightness in his self, and he had this uprightness as well. I remember one thing actually Munchie said, we were having a conversation, it was like it must have been maybe 2 years ago. We were having a conversation about manhood. And there was a member in the Saturday Free School who had said, I don't even want to be a man. There's nothing good about being a man, Yeah, right. When we had the meeting right in the building high school. Yeah, not in the dining hall, the other one. Gosh, maybe. Yeah, the Liberation Center. Yes. And he said, and it was because I never really heard this articulated, but he had said to me, or not, he said to the group, I love being a man, right? Like that, I love being a man, and that there's a great beauty in being a man, as there is a great beauty in being a woman. And first of all, to hear something like that articulated is to hear a pride being articulated. Taking pride in what it is you're doing, in who it is you are, and what it is that you built out of being a man. He was working his whole life at the shipyard. Dr. was talking about the shipyard, and then also I remember there was a moment. It was the Lotus event that was happening at UPenn on Du Bois, and there was a guy in the. He had said, Munch was talking about, how those pastors and they were molesting young people, and some guy had said, move on, next question, and Munch looked him right in his face and said, this is how we talk, this is how we talk, and to see a man stand up for what he believed in, to state that he was a man. This, is all to answer this question of the importance of a role model. Because that's what's necessary. For these young Black men, for these young men, for these young women, for young people, period. Actually, Brandon had relayed a story to me from Gregory Mohammed, that he was able to orchestrate a sit-down meeting amongst two Cambodian gangs. This ability to stand up, this ability to help bring about a peace, to act as a party ward, to act in a way, or to act on the basis of, we're going to bring about a unity. Just like Joan described Henry Winston, Henry Winston being able to sit two opposing people down and by the end of the conversation have those two opposing people walking in the same direction. Yeah, sure.
You see, I understand what you're asking, role models. It's a complex question because being a role model for a person who comes from more or less stable conditions is one thing. You say, well, look, sister, look, brother, I don't want you to go in the wrong way. You know, don't shoot that dope. Don't, you know, smoke all that weed, or something like that. You know, get your education. Okay, you could say, well, so-and-so grown person acted as a role model. But what if you are looking at young men who every day of their lives in one or another way are looking at death? See, now you're dealing with a different existential situation. And I think, of course, I would agree, the revolutionary example is the strongest example, the collective example. So you get the Nation of Islam, you get the Black Panther Party, you get the unemployed councils, you get other types of movements. In the South, with the Civil Rights Movement, it was something different, where you were looking at open terror of white supremacist organizations. But this urban situation where young men, I mean from childhood, are looking at death. They've seen brothers, they've seen uncles, they've seen fathers, they've seen sisters and aunts killed on the street or killed by dope. Even James Baldwin, when he speaks to his nephew, when he speaks to other people, young people, he doesn't see that. And he came up in hard times, in Harlem, poverty. So I think we have to look at a more complex situation. And frankly, I defer to Brandon Doe on this. Does even the Nation of Islam, who used to have the language and the moral authority to go among the most oppressed, do they have that same thing today?
I think that's a good question. What Jeremiah asked, but also the questions that Doc is asking. And I think that's also a whole nother challenge that we're dealing with, because I think the oppressed people, especially in this city, have their own language, they have their own mannerisms, and they have their own body language. And that's easily recognizable and differentiated, you know, if you're in that space. But for Jeremiah's question on role models, I think I try to put it into the perspective of what did someone like Muhammad Ali do for me? And I think what he did for me was he opened me up to the world, and he showed me another way of being. I mean, especially coming from my background where we don't see many brave models, and you know, young men, especially young Asian men, are taught to act afraid whenever they're around white people or whenever they're around people in power. But I remember when I started speaking up about certain things, like against feminism, against its role in the family structure and its intervention in the family structure, it made people uncomfortable, and a lot of people came at me. Also, as a defender of the Black radical tradition of Martin Luther King, of Muhammad Ali, of Baldwin and Du Bois, it did make people uncomfortable. But I think the main thing is that the reason why it made people uncomfortable because I'm not letting the ruling class choose who my friends and my enemies are. If you call Martin Luther King Jr. a womanizer, I'm gonna tell the truth and I'm gonna call you a racist. Because how can you call him a womanizer? First off, who are you keeping in mind? Who are you thinking of when you call him that? And are you thinking about when he stood out against the Vietnam War? Are you thinking about the Vietnamese women that were getting bombed? Are you thinking about the Black mothers in America who had to see their sons go off and fight in wars where they were put on the front lines and murdered? And I think based off that model, based off of Muhammad Ali and Martin Luther King, I try as much as I can to carry myself with dignity, to carry myself with pride, to let young people know that there's another way of being. And I think God asks a very difficult question. But at the same time, I know that among men, there's a respect of other men who are men. And the truth, when you see someone stand up to the truth, I think that has the potential to transcend racial boundaries. Because if you see someone different or someone brave, you're like, wow, like who is this? You know, like, and then you get curious about it, and then, you know, about that person, and you might not agree with them, but then you admire them. And I think with the way that I carry myself, I try to let people know that there's another way to be, and you can choose your own friends and your own enemies. And if you look into our history, it's already written there. It's already written that Asian and Black people are destined to unite. It's already written there. And yeah, I think that's what it means. That's part of what it means to be a role model for me, you know, to let people know that there's another way of being. But also, yeah, a lot of it is just about defending respect and integrity, because a lot of people in our society today is beaten down, is, you know, like Doc said, Black people have been canceled way before cancel culture. And to see someone speak up, that's inspirational in many ways. But I take pride in knowing that I'm a free man, and that if anyone disrespects me, they're disrespecting my mother's son. So now you're disrespecting my mother. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like at the same time, like, you know, this is very important. And, you know, yeah, we do need role models to look up to. And, you know, I think about the first time I met Doc as well. I recognized that he was a free man. So, yeah.
When we think about men and role models, you associate the term manhood. And because of the peculiarities of my coming of age, as I was sharing earlier, as I went through the different stages of my journey, my focus was on personhood. And in that case, you have not manhood, but exactly, it's personhood. And to give you an example that speaks to the spiritual depth and authenticity of the Nation of Islam. I was at my younger sister's wedding reception. She was at Bryn Mawr when I was at Haverford. She married Ron Gilliam, a member of the Gilliam Brothers musical group. They were the backup band for Sister Sledge before they became famous. At the after wedding reception hangout, at my brother-in-law's family home on Cobb Street Parkway. I was going from the living room through the dining room to the kitchen to get a beer. And Ron and his brothers, they knew everybody in West Philly. And so when he got married, it was a huge event. And in the dining room at the table was a group of about 10 brothers from the nation. And as I went through the dining room, they sort of looked at me. I was always self-conscious amongst heterosexual brothers because they would giggle at me and stuff like that and whisper. But this time, they looked at each other as I was coming through, and they didn't speak to me directly at first. But as I went into the refrigerator, they said, "Honest blood." Looked at each other, "Honest blood." And when I came back through, they said, "Honest blood." And they looked at me and smiled. And it was pretty obvious what they were perceiving. They sensed my spirit. And they told me to sit down and talk to them. And they accepted me and affirmed me as a man. I have never, ever been so affirmed in my personhood, in my manhood, and it happened with the brothers from the nation. Okay, so I'll talk about personhood, and if you want to look at a model, you might look at them. And I'll close on this note. We read a wonderful essay by James Baldwin when he met Elijah Muhammad. Needless to say, when we read that, did I read that? I think I read it. Not the poem, when he went to meet Elijah Muhammad. Yeah. When we were reading that and talking about it, you know, I thought about my encounter with the nation because Elijah Muhammad said, "I want to talk to James Baldwin." You see what I'm saying? So there you have it. What I said earlier about coming of age and being able to landmark, regardless of age, that point in your life when you know totally, unequivocally, unambiguously that you have connected and can affirm co-humanity that has no politic, no ideology. And when Winston talks about we, that's what he's talking about.
Well, I also wanted to ask, I think one of the benefits of having this group of speakers representing different generations is you get a broader and more fuller sense of, what really is, what defines our time and how is it different? How did we reach this point? And I think many of you have already referred to this, but I just wanted to ask more directly, like, what today is the sense of possibility or the sense of hope for the future that's felt by the current younger generation, and how does it compare to the past? And actually, Grady, when you were talking about coming of age, it made me think of actually King, when he was standing up against the Vietnam War and saying that America has to grow up. America has to achieve a level of maturity that it may not be able to achieve. And I think, this question of war and what it has done to the American spirit, in addition to all the other material aspects, I think I was just wondering how maybe that could be connected as well in terms of, do young people today feel a sense of even, what Brandon was saying of agency, of possibility, and how is that different from before? Like why has it changed?
Again, I think you've put a very profound question on the table because, one of the things that concerns me all the time, that and I guess also with Grady, that maybe we are speaking from the past. Maybe we do not speak to this time, and of course, to the future. I hope that's not the case. We could not have done this symposium on Henry Winston if we felt that the past was dead. And those that are dead, and let's move on to what is now. But, I think, you can imagine if you come up as a teenager and you are seeing not only Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, but Muhammad Ali. I mean, if I might just say, I think Muhammad Ali was such a revelation. Such a revelation. I mean, no matter what type of documentary they do, and they might try to distort him or say that he was duped and going into the Nation of Islam and all that type of thing, it's something about him that always comes out. And of course, myself having been mentored by Henry Winston, such a generous man, a Southern man, by the way, who, by the time I met him, had been blinded in prison and never mentioned it, never showed any bitterness. Like he said, I mean, he had to accept it as part of the sacrifice of struggle. But having said that, I mean, I still feel ill-equipped to address the existential needs of a lot of my own people, especially the young. I just want to say one more thing on this. In the free school, and Serafina brought this up last night, the blues. And I think Kathy in her presentation is going to be on from pop art to hip hop. And one of the things that this writer named Warren Longmire says is that hip hop is the first postmodern music, which means that it is the first Black music that is not grounded in the blues. Now, that's a frightening thought to me, because the blues, like Du Bois said, is the rhythmic narrative of a disappointed people. We talk to each other through the blues. And I could just name a lot of people: Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, and John Coltrane. I mean, I don't know. Frankly, I would ask you, what is it like to grow up in a world where you don't have Aretha Franklin or Ray Charles, or for that matter, the Delphonics or whoever? I mean, I don't know what that feels like. So you tell me, I mean, how do y'all feel growing up in a world where that doesn't exist? If you talk to your peers and you say, well, I'm down with Ray Charles, they look at you like you on the pipe, you know what I'm saying? I mean, is that so? I just don't know. So I think there is a generational difference here. And will it all come together somewhere down the line? And I'm just trying to live long enough to say, oh, now my young people are hearing what I'm saying. Or now my point of view can be heard. I don't know that will happen. I hope it does. Can I just say one other thing? And I talked to Catherine about this, I talked to Serafina about it. Everybody knows that if the Black masses weigh in in this current crisis, where you have enormous disenchantment and divisions among the white masses. We've never seen it like this before. This is unprecedented. Everybody knows that if Black folk weigh in, it don't have to be everybody, but just enough of us, the whole equation changes. Everybody knows that. That's why the ruling class tries to keep us marginalized, turn on each other. We're going to give you the leaders, not that you lead, but that we want you to have, all that type of thing. But then I ask the question, and forgive me, don't take this to the bank, don't repeat it, but I ask the question, we've given so much. We have given so much. We have changed this country at least 2 or 3 times. Changed the country. Our art, our music is really the American music. I don't care whether you call it country or whether you call it rock and roll. It's really the blues interpreted through the white experience. You know, not as bluesy, but you know, yes. So we've changed it. Can we do it again? Are we exhausted? You know, because sometimes the people do get exhausted. Sometimes we've given so much that we just can't do it again. I'm not saying that is the reality. Sometimes I have to look at it as a social scientist and ask, how much can we ask of one people?
I used to go to this barbershop on Kensington and Somerset, and that used to be where the main intersection of the drug market is currently on Kensington and Allegheny. So it moved up a few blocks since then. But I went to this barbershop for about 3-4 years. I mean, my cousin worked there, so that's why I was there. But I mean, if you like, you know, most men know the barbershop is a place where you can get an education. Like, there's men conversing and they talk about things and they share their experiences with each other. But I think I learned a little bit, you know, about what the population that Doc is talking about goes through. Because this barbershop was it was right on the corner of that intersection, and it was where all the dealers went because, you know, like they wanted to look nice. And I met a lot of them, and, you know, like, contrary to whatever is said on the news, and, you know, not saying that there's not contradictions, like a lot of them were just like people with kids, like young men, but also men in their 40s and even 50s with kids and grandkids and young single moms. And, you know, a lot of them were warm people. But over the years, like gradually, you know, I would come to the barbershop, I would be like, where's so-and-so? I just saw them last week. Oh, he got killed. Where's so-and-so? I just saw them like a couple months ago, they got locked up. Where's this other guy? Like he killed somebody. And you just see like, it's like, just like a whole population disappearing. One of the guys that I met, his name was Mitch. I hope I'm not snitching, but his name was Mitch, and he turned his life around. But what was sad about it was that I saw him on the corner one day, so I was talking to him outside, And I was like, hey man, long time no see, because I haven't seen him at the barbershop in a long time. And he told me like, I just got my life together, you know, like he was wearing the whole Muslim garb and everything. He got himself together and, you know, like he was a young man, he had tattoos on his face. And he was saying that he got his life together and he now works at Ross. And I was like, it just kind of put everything into perspective because I was like, damn, like he's saying that he got his life together and talking about he works at Ross, like that's something that he should be proud of, which he should be proud of, but it's Ross. And so it's a retail store. And I'm saying that anyone on that corner could make $500, $600, $700 a day. So the option, like, what are the options now? And at the same time, I mean, about the blues, like what I noticed is that, you know, oh, and by the way, a lot of these people that are selling drugs there, the black people that are selling drugs, they're not from there. They're from places like Richard Allen, Raymond Rosen, like around the other side of North Philly. And they're selling it to white people, which is also an interesting dynamic. Right.
And if I could say that's, you know, that in itself is, you know, just unexplainable. I mean, how did that happen? I grew up in a heroin neighborhood, and I saw black people selling heroin to other black people, you know, but all of these white people strung out on the street, and all the people selling dope to them are these young black men with white t-shirts and jeans and white sneakers. I mean, it's like, well, of course we know they don't control what's going on, but that in itself is visually shocking given all of the claims about who is the white supremacist. I mean, because I said to him, what about, are these white supremacists? I mean, you know, and no, they're not. They, like the black poor victims of a system, I would call it a white supremacist social system, but yeah.
I mean, the last point I was gonna make is just that, you know, they all listen to rap music, and I don't know. I mean, yeah, I mean, this has something to do with it about not seeing another choice, like not having another avenue available to you. But yeah, I mean, you don't see these young men in the mosque. And I mean, yeah, one of the questions that we ask in the free school is where are they?
Maybe we can go to audience questions. If you have questions.
Hi, thank you for those really rich conversation. When I hear the crisis of the youth, I hear there's a crisis of historical transition, or right, of historical experience being transmitted to a younger generation. And that's expressed in the kind of despair of people if there's a sense of no opportunity to change things. And you said two things, Doc, that kind of stuck with me. One of them was, is there a Henry Winston potentially on the corner? And the second one also was feeling like you perhaps didn't have the language to talk to these people you were just describing right now. And I was wondering what you see as maybe, I think how to put this, the obstacle to how history may be being transmitted to a younger generation, what perhaps absence of institutions there are that could actually give people, you know, it's one thing to read a book from these authors that you've mentioned, and certainly it's inspiring and you learn a lot, but there's something about historical experience that the words are not going to quite get, that has to be kind of embodied in some kind of institution. So I was wondering, and this is for everybody, what you see as something that's absent, that's kind of transmitting history, because history could be a way of critiquing the present, of saying, look, the world you were born into, it doesn't have to be this way. there are moments of past opportunities that continue to be missed, and maybe perhaps that's why we're drawn to various people, Martin Luther King or Henry Winston, because they seem to still be tasking us in the present in the way that, you know, there are great thinkers in all of human history that don't task us. You know, Aristotle, he's great, but there's not a task from him in the way that there is with Martin Luther King. So is that, I don't know if that question is clear. I was kind of all over the place, but yeah. Okay, thank you.
Just to be clear on the question, you're kind of asking, yeah, how these people, like, yeah, those historical moments, how they would task us. And is that kind of along the lines of my?
Yeah, what seems to be blocking the historical experience of, let's say, the Black freedom struggle, as you mentioned, it has to be passed down to new generations in order for them to take it. You know.
I get what you're saying, Danny. What he's asking, if I'm correct, is here is a people who have waged such a magnificent struggle, produced all of these magnificent people. And you ask the question, but has that been passed on? Is that kind of in our cultural DNA? Or has it been weakened even in our own memories? Danny, if you ask me, I have to say, I don't know. I don't know, man. And that's part of what scares me, that I don't know. I don't like to not know where Black folk are. I don't like it. I don't feel good about it. Yeah. So, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I want to answer this question again, now looking at a person. There's a security guard who works at my job. I kind of come back to a lot because he's a very upright young man. You know, for this, I mean, during this time, young men might be standing up straight, but they're not upright. And he's a very upright and has a lot of integrity. But this historical memory of the Black freedom struggle is not in him. And he would be the example, really, of and someone who I would say has the qualities of a revolutionary, but doesn't have a historical understanding. And I want to tie it back to the reason why you can kind of ricochet it off of, okay, well, this people has a historical understanding of themselves. Like Brandon described Vietnam, the Vietnamese people. Even though they're impoverished, he would say there is this sense of struggle, like we had a Ho Chi Minh, a peoplehood, yeah. And
that's what Portugal was saying about India. They're poor, but there's still a sense somewhere of a peoplehood, of a language. And somehow I feel that the forces of repression are using our culture against us to beat us back. And that's what angers me the most. You know, we can work with the poverty, but just to take all of that beauty where the youth no longer hear Nina Simone. Yeah. What the hell does that mean?
Because that's the, oh, sorry, I really don't mean to cut you off, I'm so sorry. But that's the historical vector. I like how you come back to, you know, culture, it's culture, it's the songs, the blues. That's how our stories are passed down from one another. You know, it was this thing Baldwin talks about, the slave song, you know, steal away. That's, you know, we time to move, time to go off the plantation. And the blues, you know, they convey stories, they convey how we made it over. How my soul looks back and wonder how I made it over. Do you know what I mean? And then there's, I mean, there's R&B and Marvin Gaye, you know, What's Going On. There's all these, and Curtis Mayfield, you know, like Make Me of You or The Other Side of Town. You know, we have these songs that conveyed our struggles, and conveyed who we are. And there was a deep type of unity in culture. in the culture that we.
Popular culture contributed to unity. You know, I always say to Serafina, she's a jazz singer, but I always say, okay, she's not. But I said to her that I wanted her to become a R&B singer. You know, because I felt that R&B is closer to the masses than a lot of jazz singing is. One, because R&B songs are written by R&B artists or people in the R&B genre. And the other thing is because R&B brings not only the blues and jazz, but it brings this other thing, is the gospel music, the church. So it has multiple levels of communication. And then, of course, I won't go further into it, but I would say, yes, something is missing right now. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
A couple of things. I think the problem of role models, of defining the moment we're in, for which we need models of personhood and leadership and so on and so forth, has to be related to the transitional moment that we're in. For instance, for over 2 decades, an organization founded by an African-American psychologist, Brother Eddie, called the Privilege Institute, has been sponsoring an annual conference called the White Privilege Conference. When I first mentioned this, I had to clarify for people, it's anti-white privilege. But in any event, this, I've been to 4 of them. They have taken all of the available arts and academic disciplines and have applied them to white self-understanding of its own entitlement and privilege. The numerous racial justice reading groups, I am a practicing Quaker now 3 years. All of the meetings in this area have Black Lives Matter signs, they have addressing racism, working groups, and so on and so forth. And in these meetings and discussions, you hear the despair of progressive whites. I'm talking about suburban whites. I live in Delaware County. I'm one of a few, if not the only person in these discussion groups, in the despair on so-and-so. I thought she was progressive, she voted for Trump. Oh, my roommate voted for Trump, blah, 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 blah. The world is coming to an end. I can't be friends with them. And I said, wait. And I have to fall back and tell them, when I was 14, the story that I told you about my friends and I hanging out outside our gate because we couldn't cross that line. You would not have heard any white person self-examining themselves about racism. The fact that, to jump forward to the campaign that Trump won, when David Duke disavowed being a racist, any white person today who's accused of racism will not publicly avow that. Now, there are a number of strategic reasons why that's the case. But first and foremost, related to that stratagem, would have to be the people in the middle. If they want to carry the day, they have to get converts. So, okay, we're not naive, we know what they're doing. But more to my point, and I often draw a comparison to the atmosphere and cultural change that I'm talking about with climate change in science. There is a climate change morally in this country. Hence you have the N-word. Hence you have what I'm talking about, a disavowal publicly of racism. January 6th is about sensing the moral climate change. One term of an African-American president could be regarded as a statistical fluke. 2 times the Tea Party gets formed. And for the first time in generations, white people no longer have the confidence that because you look like me, you think like me.
About 5, so maybe we could have one last question, if that's okay, and then move to the next town hall.
Thank you all for sharing your life experiences and putting your heart into this town hall meeting. My question is around the idea that I get from King of the soul force, the application of your humanity to someone else, so you can feel something and know something with your heart, even if you might not necessarily understand it or know with your brain. When I think of King's time, he applied that to people with the, I guess, the most hatred, highest hatred in their heart, that made it impossible for them to feel a human brotherhood. And this was part of he had a greater strategy of taking on the great spiritual crisis coming from the evils of racism, militarism, and economic exploitation. And when I think of the spiritual crisis that we have right now, which has taken on a new form, but same essence, I think the possibility of a soul force or being able to move society one step forward. So I wonder where you guys feel this is most needed and where it can come from. You talked about the difficulty that Black people face right now, having really carried this country forward for so long. And having
But you see what that problem is. I mean, the problem for Black people and the problem for the country. When the nation has so relied upon Black people in times of crisis to pull the nation's chestnuts out of the fire. Can we do it again? And what should we expect if we do it again? Is it just that we give it all and get little in return, where others benefit more than we do? And these are questions, like Brandon said, you will hear discussed in the barbershop. You'll hear discussed all over the place. You know, is it worth it? That's what and that's not among, the young guys on the corner. I mean, this is in general discussion. This is in Cobb's Creek, in neighborhoods with a lot of Black professionals like teachers and lawyers, where people are saying, we've been betrayed by the Democratic Party. They were saying this on election day. We've been betrayed by the Democratic Party. We've been betrayed by the Black misleadership class. Is it worth it? You hear this quite a bit, and you're right. That's soul force. But Martin Luther King, I mean, where we're gonna find that again? But but I think that's part of the task of the free school, to continue to study this. Michelle Liu and the Lotus Collective are moving more to sociology. And I know Magna's work is in sociology. And we have to understand what is going on more than we do at the present time. And I think this might help to begin that.
Okay, with that, I think we're going to move to the next town hall. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Just quickly, I wanted to say, if you'd like to support the work of Saturday Free School, please do visit the t-shirt stand in the back to purchase a t-shirt and or make a donation. Thank you. Also, if you don't have cash on you, we accept Venmo and Cash App.
All right, but so we're going to get started with our next panel now. Thank you to everybody. Thank you so much for staying with us throughout this long day, but just staying out of the discipline for learning and understanding and coming together. So I would like to open up our final town hall discussion for the day, which is called "The Fierce Urgency of Our Times. Will Young People Fight for Socialism?" The Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation aims to make a contribution to the ideological struggle in Philadelphia, the nation, and even around the world. Henry Winston and his works are the shoulders upon which we stand. Winston's strategy for a Black agenda showed how philosophies that appeared to be radical meant accommodation with monopoly capital. He clarified how Martin Luther King was the greatest American revolutionary because he brought working people to the forefront of the movement for liberation. Winston mentored young people who were caught up in the fashionable trends of their times and modeled dignity and humility, what a true revolutionary looks like, how a true revolutionary behaves. His life embodies the enormous sacrifice of our ancestors in the struggle for freedom. And just thinking about the story that Grady told, he lived by the words of W.E.B. Du Bois. If the great battle of human rights against poverty, against disease, against color prejudice is to be won, it must be won, not in our day, but in the day of our children's children. Ours is the blood and dust of battle, theirs the rewards of victory. If then they are not there, because we have not brought them then into the world, we have been the guiltiest factor in conquering ourselves. It is our duty then to accomplish the immortality of Black blood in order that the day may come in this dark world when poverty shall be abolished, privilege be based on individual desert, and the color of a man's skin be no bar to the outlook of his soul. This panel strives to continue the work of Winnie, and the purpose of this panel is to discuss the moral imperative of the youth, the barriers to ideological clarity today, and the way from what is to what should be. With that, I'd like to introduce the panelists. Alice Lee is an organizer with the Saturday Free School who recently led efforts to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China. Nuri Yi is a member of the Du Bois King Reading Group and is currently working to put together a conference on imperialism in Asia, specifically North Korea and Vietnam. Serafina Harris is an artist for liberation from Germantown and an organizer of this gathering. And finally, Catherine Blunt is a longtime teacher, trade unionist, freedom fighter, and fighter for peace and Black liberation. So before we get started, I just wanted to call as Jeremiah already said, as you've already seen, just clarify the format. This is a town hall. We really want to encourage discussion among the audience. We want to have as much discussion as possible. So I'm going to ask the panelists just to make relatively brief remarks, probably not more than 5 to 7 minutes. And then I'll ask a question or two and we'll open up the floor for comments. So thank you.
Yes, this panel is about the youth. Earlier when we were getting lunch, Seraphina and I were talking, and I guess I'm also included in the youth, and many of us here are also considered the youth. And apparently for Doc's definition, youth is everyone below the ages of 40. So, below 55. So if anyone needed that context, that's the age group. So I'll get started. One of the first works of W.E.B. Du Bois that I read with others, some of who are in the audience today, is one titled The Mortal Child. Du Bois starts with the following, quote, "If a man die, shall he live again? We do not know. But this we do know, that our children's children live forever and grow and develop toward perfection as they are trained. All human problems then center in the mortal child, and his education is a problem of problems," end quote. Now, none of us at that point had children, and to my knowledge, still don't. But we were young American college students with little understanding of the world around us and our responsibility to it. And reading and discussing The Mortal Child together brought important realizations that if we were to struggle to find any purpose in life, it was important to know who we were struggling for, as opposed to merely against, and what we were struggling for. Through the years, we've read more of Du Bois and others, such as James Baldwin and Martin Luther King Jr., and it has strengthened our conviction that the role of revolutionaries is to imagine and create a more just and equal society in which all children are able to grow and flourish, rather than conform to one in which poor and or Black children are left behind, save random chance. However, for our children, it is difficult to grow up upright in a society with an education system and popular discourse that does not ask or seek to honestly answer the most relevant and human of questions, such as why there is so much poverty in our country, which is supposed to be so wealthy, why there are wars where people are killed and homes are destroyed, instead of mature and principled diplomacy. What is the purpose of education? That is, what is an education for children as opposed to an education for industry? And how do we live beside our neighbors and friends with love? Instead, our education system and popular discourse prevents any substantive dialogue as to how the ruling class, comprising an elite few, dictates the economic, political, and cultural framework of our nation and controls the institutions that serve to uphold the system as it is. The condition of our children, a condition not unique to children, speaks to the crisis of our times. Children who are not yet 20, who have lost the sparkle in their eyes and can't see a future themselves. In Shattered Dreams, Martin Luther King Jr. describes how people react in the face of such circumstances. The person who hates God, hates others, hates himself. The person who withdraws, who doesn't hate, but also doesn't love. The person who believes that everything is out of their hands. This is the necessity of a radical revolution of values. The lessons of past revolutionaries show us that those who are interested in the transformation of the economic and political structures of society must not neglect the transformation of people. History has shown that people armed with ideas that explain the nature of their oppression and a positive vision forward can transform to be people capable of reconstructing, and governing a new society. We saw this during our discussions of China during the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China. Ordinary people who joined the Long March that ultimately led to the birth of a new China in 1949. Here in America, we have a rich legacy dating back to the ideals of the American Revolution and advances of the Civil Rights Movement. However, as I conclude and we move on to the panel discussions, I wanted to bring forward the following question. As the world revolutionaries who studied these past 2 days had asked in their times, and the Saturday Free School has been asking, what is it that will give people, including the youth, the strength to stand up and move our revolutionary history forward. Winston's life offers us two pillars I wanted to re-emphasize. One is the dormant possibilities of ordinary people. As Winston described of the Youth Communist League, quote, "We want to build characters that will incorporate all that is fine and good in our generation. We want to build characters whose moral code is based upon services to their generation and to the future of our people. We want to build characters who have hope and courage." End quote. A political education will not only need to elucidate our history, present, and future, but also the kinds of people we will need to become in order to move forward, in order to move to a more positive and just future. And two is the unity across sections of American society that are aligned with peace and human development. It will not only define a strategy for freedom, but the American essence of that freedom. Thank you.
I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers of this event. The last 2 days have been really meaningful, and I think especially as a young person who's been searching and studying for some time, I feel like Henry Winston is one of the figures I really need to study. And so this town hall is posed around the question, will young people fight for socialism? And I think Serafina and I both asked, well, what else will young people really do? What are the other possibilities? And is there anything else really worth fighting for? To situate ourselves, young people today are the most anxious, depressed, and nihilistic generations. The youth of today in America are a generation that sees its standards of living, future prospects, and even life expectancy declining under economic crisis and the shifting world order. Some groups and sections of society are given really nothing, treated as totally dispensable, no longer even needed for labor by the ruling class. And the challenges facing these stranded populations include literacy, unemployment, incarceration, and violence. Even the demographic of young people who have been given supposedly everything, material prosperity, college education from elite universities, entrance into the professional managerial class, who live in close proximity to the ruling elite and are being trained as its heirs. Even these people are deeply unhappy, unhealthy, and dissatisfied. The US Census reported that in April 2021, 51.7% of Americans aged 18 to 29 surveyed reported symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder, while 36.2% of Americans ages 30 to 49 and 18.5% of Americans over the age of 65 reported the same symptoms. And so the youngest group is the most depressed. And so this depressive outlook of young people, I think, is especially jarring because what youth should share is the energy, spirit, and freshness that's characteristic of young people. It should be a stage of life that's open to all the worlds and human potential, not just rebellion or rebellious nature, but clear eyes and prejudice to the status quo, open to possibilities, bold, curious, and desiring to learn. And so I think if young people are so pessimistic or depressed, it's because there's so much that we don't know and so much that has also been intentionally hidden from us. Young people today have no memory or direct life experience of the Soviet Union and the world communist movement at its height. And we've grown up under an onslaught of ideological attacks by the ruling class, who have mounted so many barriers to ideological clarity, including the promulgation of a reactionary culture of celebrity, consumption, unprincipled values, and a politics that's based on image and individualism. In the last 3 decades, this culture has had no real strong united world force to counterbalance this hegemony. And as a result, I think our consciousness has really been deprived. So as a generation, what we're lacking is experience, wisdom, and strategy. Young people are totally lacking in political education, which is to say a true education to see and understand the state of reality, and also to see the role of human beings as a force to shape and change this reality for the better. We lack the ability to really think and to truly act. And so I think that's also why Henry Winston is so important for our times and for our generation. And I want to share some of his quotes because they really resonate like they're meant for us today. When Winston wrote and spoke about the importance of political education, he emphasized it a lot as a member of the Young Communist League. He wrote, "The word education, therefore, is a central thought in everything we've done and wish to do. We don't need a young communist party, nor do we need a new organization of social clubs. We need an educational organization, one which will teach the young people to understand the world about them, to live a life with a purpose dedicated to their generation and their people. Political education, thus, isn't a departmental task, but the central means to achieve the mission of social progress and uplift. Winston wrote that an education in the spirit of socialism was needed because, quote, a permanent solution of the problems of our generation cannot be achieved under capitalism. We do not limit our education to teaching the youth the need for solving their immediate problems, job opportunities, the defeat of reaction fascism, but we see these things as part of a much larger struggle. Because for us, there is a socialist lining in every dark cloud. Because we know that while the storms of a decaying social system overtake us, if we persevere, a new dawn will break tomorrow, the dawn which alone can solve the problem of our generation, which alone can usher in the day of peace and security for all mankind, end quote. And so the slogan of the League was character building and education in the spirit of socialism. Winston wrote, quote, we want to build our characters. We want more self-study in Marxism-Leninism so that we can train ourselves for the job of leadership, so that we can help educate the millions who are still groping for answers to their problems. But can we educate the millions by just shouting socialism at the tops of our lungs? No, we cannot. Some think that, but not we. Youth will learn the need for and the inevitability of socialism only through its own experience, only in the course of its daily struggles. Therefore, character building and education in the spirit of socialism means more attention to the problems of young people, more attention to answering the arguments of our enemies, more attention to explaining and clarifying the doubts in the minds of our friends. He wrote, our country, our generation needs such strength of character and purpose if fascism is to be destroyed and if democracy and socialism are to be victorious. And so I think for young people to fight for socialism, we need to know that socialism is an option, a possibility, and a successful strategy. And we also need to know what socialism really is and means, both as a rational scientific method and the correct strategy to achieve the substance of freedom that are the strivings of the people. We need to understand its value through the transformed human beings and types of human relations it's able to produce. And so just briefly, I'm happy that we're having this town hall so that we can learn more about socialism for young people, and especially through the visionary lens of Henry Winston, whose insight is so resonant for our times.
Short, but I really do agree with things that Brandon pointed out, what Nuri pointed out. And I'm thinking about what Amelia you were talking about earlier today in terms of like the hopelessness situation. You know, one of the things that Brandon just spoke about was how like dealing with that problem of the kids on the corner, the kids at Allegheny, the kids in high school. But you know, if you speak on principle, if you're truthful, if you're honest, even if you're from a different situation, they can respect you. And that's, y'all are dealing with the question of manhood. But in my reflections, which has really helped me kind of figure out what I'm writing about for tomorrow, in those presentations, I know that me and my brother are like we stick out sometimes, and we that doesn't mean that other people haven't stuck in out, or like, you know, whatever in school or whatever like that. And I think what that also allows for other people around you is just like, okay, there's something different. You know, you could think different, and at the end of the day, everybody isn't the same anyway. So it's like, it allows for the imagination to kind of grow. So that's another thing. And that's the same thing said about communism. That's the same thing said about how we talk about Cain. Because now I'm not as naive as I was in high school, which doesn't say anything about, like, you know, being able to grow up and knowing everything. I do not know everything. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that, like, it's just the fact is that I am coming from a place of purpose, which also it means something for other people around me. You can recognize that, whether you want it to happen or not. And another phenomenon that I know happens with young people, Black young people today, and I think it can also be said, well, see, there's two things happening, I think. The white young person, and then there's Black young people, because I think Black young people are in a situation where racism being as rebranded as it is, young people are succumbing to that more in a way that they can't recognize. They don't see it as, well, like for example, on a TikTok or whatever, and you take a selfie, whatever, you make your lips like smaller. But that literally is like a kind of like, okay, if your lips are smaller, then you're like closer to being more pretty. If your hair is long, then you're closer to being pretty. So it's the same iteration or a similar iteration of the racism, or what racism is, which is meaning that, you're not supposed to be who you are. And the same thing goes with white people. And, it's like a thing, or one phenomenon that I'm just being pinpointed, or I'm just talking about, was the thing that you mentioned about jazz. So white people go to jazz more than they do the R&B, and that's not a problem. But if jazz is whitewashed and taken out of the struggle context, then, yeah, cool, you can like John Coltrane and whatnot, but they won't really mean anything. And the reason why I think, me and my brother, I guess, well, actually, what happened when we started reading Winston is that I looked up another book, or I was just like looking up Winston, and I found that he had another book, Class, Race, and Black Liberation. And I started to read it because I'm like a dork and just like read stuff all the time, ahead of time. I don't even need to be doing this, It was never the case I needed to be here. You know what I mean? In free school. It's like I'm not obligated to be responsible or take responsibility for any of this project, any of the book club, any of the time that I spent on Saturdays. That is, you know what I mean? These are the active choices that I've made in this time that we're living in. I don't have to read at all. I don't have to like, you know what I mean? I could have just went along with popular opinion, which is easy to do, But then there's always something in the back of my mind telling me like, no, this is not all that I can be. So I'm going ahead and I'm reading Class, Race, and Black Liberation, and he's talking about the Moynihan Doctrine. And I think I heard about this before in history class, but like just reading it in 2 points that he makes about the Black family and how it's the Black family's problem for like everything. And the second thing is about monopoly imperialism and how it uses racism and anti-communism as like, how to say, yes, the twin weapons against, I guess I'm gonna say it, the people. And the thing about the family is just like important for the people that I know, that I reflect upon, that go through life and think that they're the problem. And either white people feeling really guilty or Black people feeling like there isn't anything to do about their situation. And the thing about culture is important because it's getting to different things that Du Bois, Baldwin, King has said. But the fact of just saying that gets to, I think, this other problem that Doctor pointing out in terms of how do we actually connect the history with the people. And the thing about, culture nowadays is that it's used against Black people and white people and Asians over in China, Africans, you know what I mean? Like, there's just too much white, like, what I'm gonna say, the white man talking at everybody, telling them what to believe all the time. And that's that social media garbage that we keep going into because we're escaping from our responsibilities to our neighbors, to this country. And I think that what the thing that they use, or one of the tools that they use, is empathy. They can understand where the other person is coming from. Well, they put you in the place of poverty, they put you in a place of the ghetto, they put you in a place of, in Africa. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on in Hong Kong. You know what I mean? But like, Hong Kong is a part of China, and you have to accept that. You have to accept that. But if you believe what Talking Head, is telling you, which is really just a tool of the white man again, then it's then there's a problem, because you're relating to the white man in a way that you won't relate to your parents or yourself or your brothers and sisters. And so I think that with the free school, we're not wrong about what we say at all. I don't think we're incorrect, and I don't believe that in a kind of gung-ho, like we don't have any mistakes that we've ever made ever. I'm saying that to say that I guess the problem of connecting these dots is that, young people are emotionally, invested. How do I say it? I guess I don't really want to say this, but the white supremacist social system, in a way, and I only say that in parentheses, because I think that there's a definite dislike or lack of, like clarity about that relationship, if we want to be a part of that relationship, really. Yeah. So I mean, so with the Winston thing, Jacob was also really excited about the family, or the Black family being the blame of all the racist policies of the West. So there's these ideas that we're seeing today that are racist, and we're able to articulate it because of the political education that we received from Saturday Free School and its process of just being here and learning, and that. So I don't think that we're wrong, but I think that it's like on one hand, we're either doing us, we got to do us and stick to that. And I don't think it's the other hand, because I don't think they're two opposed stratagems. But I do think that this point of being able to empathize with another person is really needed, because I guess I know people need therapy, and I know people go through a lot of stuff. But like, I guess Doc, you were kind of mentioning, or something in what you said about Winston made me think about Matthew from the Dark Princess and stuff, and how he went to that meeting with Princess Kataria. So the Dark Princess is a novel by Du Bois. And I thought about it because Matthew had a lot to learn, at that meeting. He had a lot to give, and he gave his song. He gave a song to that meeting, Let My People Go. But he had a lot to learn also. And I think that the humbling process has to happen in the same glove as understanding that the other person has a lot to give as well. But I'll just leave that at that.
Okay, so I am not young, I'm young at heart. I spent my youth fighting against imperialism,
fighting for socialism, fighting for peace and justice. And I brought that struggle into the classroom as a teacher. And when I was a principal, I brought it into the school. And even outside of being a teacher and a principal, because I'm retired now, but I do go back into the schools, and I do affiliate with schools. And I remember doing what we call Martin Luther King Day of Raising Consciousness, in which Tony Montero would come and speak. And at that time, at least I had discovered King's three evils of society. And we began focusing our Martin Luther King Day of Raising Consciousness on the three evils of society, and silence is not an option. And even using clips from Reverend Dr. Barber and his revived movement that actually went from place to place, location to location, to bring about an awareness of the struggle for peace and social justice against war, against racism, and of course, against capitalism or economic exploitation. That's the nice way of saying capitalism. So I, from those experiences, even another experience I had when we brought a whole group of people into Parkway Northwest in Germantown, or East Mount Airy, whatever. And again, it was the same themes. And what I saw was that the sense of urgency and care was there among those young people. So I'm not worried about the young people here, because I know you get it. I worry about the young people out there. Where is the opportunity for them to hear about socialism? Where is there the opportunity for them to hear about changing the society in which they live? Where is there the opportunity for them to talk about gentrification, the lack of jobs, the poor education that's in their schools, so they can trace it back to the state, to monopoly capital? All right, so when I was coming up, we had those opportunities. So if we're talking about will young people struggle for socialism, where is the venue for them to learn about socialism? And that's what concerns me.
Yeah, thank you so much to all our presenters for touching on a very important theme, humility, empathy. Where will people be able to get a political education, especially in a time the state is manipulating the meaning of socialism. I mean, with Bernie Sanders, with the NGO, they will talk about socialism. But I just wanted to start with, because I was thinking about this question of youth. I mean, who is youth? Okay, you're between childhood and adulthood. And it really is a time when you are discovering who you are, what you're thinking. And childhood it's a time when others help you and other people tell you what to think in a way. And part of youth is getting an education, learning to think for yourself. But youth today are so trapped in infantilism, with Netflix and video games and, like you're saying, TikTok. Young women are obsessing over the way they look. Young men are, into their own games. And I mean, how do we raise the consciousness of youth to understand what it means to really grow up? So I'd like to start with that question.
The thing with that too is I can imagine leftist organizations wanting to do stuff on social media, and then there's us who do stuff on social media. We're on social media. But the thing, like with that, too, is like, it's different from what Catherine was just saying, which is like go to the schools, and talk at schools. And what the thing, and how to, it's like what Brandon was saying, there's a different way of being, you know, that's where it kind of gets at. The habits, your behaviors and how you interact with other people have to be actually changed. And you can't obsess over your screen on your phone for hours at a time because you feel like you have nothing to do. Or something to do is for you to study because you feel committed to the people that you're around with. And you can also teach those values in the schools that you're talking about too, in different ways, in science classes, art classes, all these things. But then, you know, you have to, it's like with the free school, as in with, you know, us involved, you know, human beings, we trust each other. And that's something that we, you know, through that process of dialoguing with other kids around or other people, that's the first step, I think, that you have to kind of bridge is to recognize each other and trust each other, and then you'll be able to be learning and teaching at the same time. But it is a lot of.
So we live in a culture where people are forever young. You're not supposed to grow up, ever. Although I am trying. So in a culture where you are forever young, you are forever irresponsible. You know, you do not, not like you young people who I'm looking at what you do. You understand technology is a tool, all right? It is not the boss of you, all right? It is a tool, and you use that technology as a tool to expose other people to ideas that you want to share and they need to hear. You know, so, but with youth, again, youth are, you know, will go through stages. You have to begin assuming responsibility. You guys have assumed responsibility. You read, you go to school, you work. But again, you are not caught up in social media and on social media. So when I talked about where is the place where we expose young people, you know, to socialism, I wasn't talking about schools per se. I mean, I have done it in the schools, but there have to be other venues where this takes place, other venues where we help young people become responsible and get them to become disciplined as they move forward. Now, I don't know whose concept was or is that you're young until you're 35. I believe in that concept because everything before then can be a wash. You know, you're running around, you're doing all kinds of different things, but in the same time, if you are in a collective or if you are with responsible people, you are learning to assume and take on responsibility. And part of that responsibility is becoming your neighbor's keeper, becoming your brothers and sisters' keeper, looking around the world and seeing what's going on and empathizing, you know, with those folk who are in struggle and relating that struggle, you know, to yourself. So there, for the grace of God, go on.
I think this question is tough because I think most of us would also think that the responsibility of the youth also falls on the role of the state. And I think in American society, the state doesn't play that role in which it's able to channel the energies of the people. And the only reason why I say that is, I don't know if people heard, this is maybe like 2-3 weeks ago with the Communist Party of China, something like a pervasive problem that's happening, I guess not even in China, but also throughout the world, is just youth being addicted to gaming. And I have younger cousins who also go through that. And when I ask them why they spend hours and hours in these games, and if they're unhappy, they're like, well, it's because I'm happy and I get to escape into this alternate reality in which they don't have to think about the world around them. And I guess the question that's facing us here in the US is that there isn't that centralized organ that will enact policies that at least limit children or on a more general level. I think it also goes back to something Serafina said at the very beginning of this conference, and partly why I don't know how to answer this question, which is that I feel very fortunate to have been pulled into this, I guess, roots of free school, where I think a lot of the people that we meet here, it's one-on-one, where people have met others that are part of free school and have met people who have spent time listening to them and hearing like, what they have gone through growing up in the society. Because it is really difficult to grow up as, it's difficult to grow up in a society where you're constantly barraged with like feelings of self-worth, being able to look at other people even in the eye. Like that's something that I learned after coming here, like to look at people in the eye and actually be able to talk to people. And I guess the question, I guess this doesn't answer the question, but it's, I think it starts, at least that's what we're trying to do here, which is to like one-on-one reach people. And that's also the part of how you build a movement or how you transform society, is that there are no shortcuts in terms of transforming people. It's a process. And I think the benefit that we don't have right now is a movement that is just as in its qualitative aspects also matches, like the quantitative aspects also match the qualitative aspects. And I think that's why the responsibility falls on people who do have that fortune to have been part of knowing this, I guess, truth about how the world works and also what options there are for us to move forward.
Yes. Thank you, Alice. I just wanted to ask him one more question before I open it up, because the last panel was a panel of young men, and this happens to be a panel of all women. And and I mean, the last panel was, specifically about the degradation faced by men, our men. And I just wanted to ask if, we could talk a little bit about the problems faced by women and the role of revolutionary women. And also related to this question of growing up, what does it mean to become a woman?
Since I'm all grown up. Growing up Black and female was not easy because, you have all these white concepts of beauty and you have the oppression of Black people. And I'm sure that that's true for women of color, no matter where they are, because the standard of beauty is a white standard of beauty. But what helps is engagement in struggle. And when you engage in struggle, you accomplish small things and larger things. You affirm yourself, and you become assured of yourself, and you become clear about what's important and what's not important. And you cannot be deterred. I mean, while I was growing up, there was all this Afrocentrism, and and I liked wearing African garb, I love it, and the head wraps and all that kind of stuff. But I was always clear. I may love to dress like that, all right? I love the affinity with Africa, but again, I understood I was African American. I'm African American in America, and that the struggle was here. I could not take myself to Africa to reform Africa. That the struggle was here. It was a struggle not just among and with Black people, but a struggle with all those who would struggle with us. And so being a Black woman in the struggle meant that I understood clearly that I had to be strong like most Black women have to be strong for our men, our children, you know, our male children, our husbands, our brothers, all that. And even my neighbors down the street who hang out on the corner and try to sell drugs, all right? But again, you begin to identify and secure yourself based on the struggles you engage in that are struggles about truth and justice and love.
Well, I mean, this is something I always really learned from Catherine, which is, you know, women's liberation and how, like Doc was saying, how it's different than feminism. And this thing of responsibility, you know, taking responsibility for others, which is what mothers do civilizationally, and which is what women do, which is why it's horrible that the very idea of being a woman is under attack, because it's an attack on our civilizations. Yeah, and I think it's very important to say that women have to love and support men and understand men and the struggles they go through, because we really do need each other. Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it for thousands of years, and we have to continue to keep the fabric of our civilization strong for the next generation of young men and young women. So with that, I'd like,
Yeah, I also think that this kind of goes back to the question of how youth today are trapped in infantilism, because I feel like this question of like, what does it mean to become a woman? I don't think it was a question that you would have had to ask with such existential tones in past generations. But today I feel like becoming a woman or becoming a man is the choice, essentially. And if you decide not to make the choice to take responsibility, you don't have to become a man, you don't have to become a woman. And instead you can basically live in a prolonged state of childhood where, having not made the moral choice to take responsibility, you're presumably innocent. And I feel like that's the crime of this infantilization, which is also encouraged by the ruling class and by the state. And so, yeah.
It's like, what happens to the children, you know, at that? That's first and foremost. But I also remember, like, a while back, Sabrina Sample did her event on the women, and we had looked at documentaries of Indira Gandhi, Greta Scott King, and Winnie Mandela, and Nina Simone. I don't really remember a documentary on Nina Simone, but that too. And later, the girls in free school watched another documentary on Winnie Mandela. It was good. And, you know, it's an interesting question for me, because I didn't really think too much about it, I guess. But I agree with what you're saying in terms of struggle. That's two. But to see and know, like, well, like, you know, I guess I'm still thinking about it. But to know that there are these examples was important for me, because it sets a certain tone and pace that, you know, just a way to act. I think in a way I've always looked for these, like, better myself. That's what I'm kind of in it for. And I think in that, you know, it kind of brings it out to the broader, you know, the people around me. But I really like those documentaries. I really like celebrating those women in the way that we did, because they were progressives. And I think that's something that's missing with all, like, the Cardi B's and, you know, Megan Thee Stallions and stuff like that. Like, they're saying that they're the dominant, you know, person in the relationship, basically. And the celebrity thing is a total wash. It's a total, I don't even know whitewash is the right word, but the demolition of what being a woman is as compared to, Indira, Winnie, Coretta Scott King. But those three will always stay really close to my heart, just to be honest with you. And I don't think that there's space for that level of thinking when we're being confronted with so many images about what women should be, what they should look like, what they should wear, who should tell them what to wear, how much money is made off of all of that. And that's a problem for younger girls that are younger than me. And it's true. Like, social media doesn't boss us around in preschool. Like, it doesn't. But I think that, like, these other women, have to be at the fore of young people's minds, young girls' minds, in a way that is honest to shift that kind of paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, just to underscore what Catherine said, you find out who you are in the context of struggle, in the course of struggle. You don't let someone else dictate to you who you are. So with that, I want to open it up for questions. Oh, the mic is already there. Questions, comments, anything that we've spoken about. If there's no, also it has been a long day. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess thinking about, like, on the topic of education, I think one of the most beautiful things about children is that drive they have to understand the world. And I guess one of the most tragic things is that's kind of been taken out of the education system. Is how do you foster an education that keeps that alive, until somebody grows up to an adult?
It's a shame that our education system has been in the hands for 10 years of Dr. Hyde. They chased him out of Prince George's County. And of course, Philadelphia welcomed him to destroy the educational system that we have here, and he has almost destroyed it completely. And now they are setting themselves up to hire a new superintendent who will continue the destruction of public education, because education has become a commodity. So what has happened is that, Philly did not used to be this quiet. All right, Philly is too quiet. We have accepted too much disinformation and just too much abuse, or at the hands of our so-called elected officials and our government and this Democratic Party. So, we have to let people know what we want our children to learn. We have to let people know what we want in our schools and what kind of superintendent we want. We can no longer be silent. As King said, silence is not an option. And we have been silent too long. We have people in this city who know what education is and what education should be in our public schools. However, we have a school board that is hand-selected by our mayor, who is hand-selected by God who knows. And it's a school board that does not want to exact any kind of credible education from height, all right? And if they don't want to do it from height, what do you think they're going to do with the next superintendent? We need an educational system that has a curriculum that is authentic, that is also an educational system that provides qualitative and humanitarian reading and studying for our young people. That has been wiped out of the schools completely, all right? We need a school system that is caring and loving of our children. Forget this so-called, what do they call it? I'm trying to think. It's a whole new thing. Critical race theory? Not critical, oh no, please don't even give that. Oh, outcome-based is not bad because, see, what you teach what you want the children to learn, and then you test what you want them to learn. So outcome-based at least guide you about what you should teach. However, the outcomes should be realistically determined, right? It should be determined as to what we want our children to learn and not what corporate America wants us to teach our children when we buy the textbooks and the platforms, the technological platforms that we put the children on. So the other thing is we need to say what we want for our teachers. We need more African-American teachers, more African-American Black male, more African-American male teachers. We need more teachers of color to be in our schools so that our young people understand that they live in a multicultural, multiracial world, and multiracial, multicolor city as well. And we need a superintendent that is going to, of course, make that happen. And if we continue to be silent, it will never happen. So the quest for us is, how do we raise our voices to make our schools germane, equitable, and certainly accountable to us, so that our children are taught what they need to learn, not just to become good citizens, because for me, and I think Baldwin says, you know, when schools and education is meant to teach children to actually be able to question society and not just accept it, all right? So the question is, how do we then organize or raise our voices to make sure we get quality teachers, quality education, and a superintendent that is either from Philly or has taught in Philly or been in Philly, because if they don't know the Philly system, it's all over. I hope that answers, you know, but there is a need, and you know, certainly they're making a selection now. And if you want to do something now, you actually, you can email Kenny and let Kenny know you're tired of him. No, you don't want to say that. But let Kenny know that what you expect of that school board, which he appointed with respect to selecting a superintendent, and you want more teachers of color in the schools, and you want a curriculum that includes the voice, Baldwin and King.
Okay, I think we're going to conclude this town hall. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. I wanted to ask Serafina to announce the next day.
Tomorrow we'll be meeting here again at 1 o'clock. It will be entitled, huh? I didn't know that. Okay, but it'll still say 1 o'clock. Right?
Make sure your clocks are updated.
Okay, yeah, and it's the day will be called Art as a Revolutionary Force in the Struggle for Freedom. So we'll have talks again and some cultural performances at the end. So thank you guys for coming.
Sorry.